Generally speaking, yes. All the vital statistics in Los Angeles, just use that as a barometer of the nation's supply chain, look great. Cargo is flowing smoothly, and there is capacity available as the market picks up, which we project it will again in 2024. Overall, global trade is down about 5%. Here in the U.S., imports are down about 18%. So some of the entanglements we witnessed during the pandemic have been worked out. A lot of thought went into it, but also eased by that lower volume. Gives us a chance to kind of catch our breath and fix some of the things that needed work.
What does holiday shipping look like right now, and what does that tell us about the direction of the economy?
Yeah, compared to years past, Jess, even in recent memory, inventory levels across the nation look good. In-store fulfillment centers themselves also look good as far as getting the products that we want when we order them or go to the store. At the Port of Los Angeles, we've seen 4 consecutive months of year-on-year gains. Steady improvement, trying to fuel that U.S. economy. And what we hear from the retailers, we had a good Thanksgiving weekend from Black Friday through Cyber Monday, about an 8% uptick. And those experts are calling for about a 3 to 4% gain in overall holiday sales when everything is said and done.
So we here on Global Wall Street have been hearing about a recession for 18 months that hasn't really shown up. What do you see in your data? What do your customers tell you?
We don't. And if you keep talking about it, you could probably talk yourself into it, as you both have seen for a long time. But by technical standards and the definition, we had a recession last year, Q1 and Q2, with GDP declines in that first and second quarter. Since then, the numbers are all over the board, unlike what we've witnessed in recent memory. But the jobs report, easing inflation. We think that interest rates have peaked now, and with 8.7 million jobs open around the country, although off their highs, still a lot for that U.S. economy to fuel in servicing those of us who are buying and going out for experiential plans with our family and friends.
What lingering issues still haven't been resolved yet from COVID when it does come to those supply chains?
The interconnectivity, the dependencies that we all have on each other. In our business, Jess, there are about 12 nodes in the supply chain that have an impact of what we do at the ports, yet we're so visible. So drawing people together for better collaboration, absolutely key. We cannot work in silos. Second, this information sharing concept that we pioneered almost a decade ago has to become mainstream. And if you're going to share information to make sure that those handoffs are succinct, you've got to protect that data through cybersecurity and resiliency.
All right, Map Go, which was just critical during the pandemic when we were talking about the supply chain. You can filter it to see the ships at port all around the world, including Los Angeles and Long Beach. You guys look pretty good there. I mean, it's a wholly different story than what it was, at the peak of the supply chain issue. Talk to us about when stuff gets into your port. I kind of forgot, you explained it to us before, it's got to get loaded, unloaded, put on a transport. How is that whole supply chain working? Getting stuff, once it's off one of those big ships, out to America?
Yeah, better, Paul, but still a lot of work to do. And if you've seen one port, you've seen one port. We're a gateway. We unload that entire vessel when it comes in, load it back up to head to Asia. Our productivity at 12,000 container units loaded on and off a vessel at Los Angeles is the best in the business today. But that cargo has to move off that terminal tarmac. And with the benefit of history, that's what slowed us down the most during COVID. Cargo was sitting at the port. Some used it as a warehouse because they were buying their goods just in case, not necessarily just in time. But all the vitals today look great. If we can get that cargo off the port property in 2 to 4 days by rail and truck, then you're really starting to see the capacity gains that we all look for.
When it comes to inflation, everyone talks about obviously goods versus services. Do you have a gauge whenever it comes to shipping to tell us what exactly that looks like when it comes to the difference between those two and how that obviously impacts inflation?
Yeah, big topic today, Jess, supply versus demand and capacity. Right now, we've got the liner shipping companies who are based in Asia and Europe bringing in new capacity, larger ships, more fuel efficient, more clean for the environment. And those purchases were made with a cycle time of about 3.5, 4 years. We're starting to see that tonnage come in as global trade has moderated and in some cases declined. So you've got excess capacity, lower demand. Prices are in the favor of the American importer and exporter this coming year.
So, Gene, you guys at your port have a great view on China. So much of that trade comes into your port from China. It's a direct route. What's your view of what are you seeing from China and the activity coming out of China in terms of trade?
Yeah, on the business side, many of the folks that we deal with are talking about a China plus one strategy, not putting all your eggs in one basket. The geopolitical issues scare a lot of people, make them nervous, but also just good business practice says, I got to be able to move my sourcing out a little bit. Similar to when I lived in China during SARS, 20 years ago. A lot of the same discussion. So we are seeing growth in Southeast and South Asia. The Port of Los Angeles, year-end 2022, about 57% of all of its cargo emanated from or was destined to China. We'll close this year at about 53% of our business with China.
Okay.
So it's moved down a little bit, but has not fallen off a cliff like some had imagined.
What about Europe?
Europe, very small percentage. Our theater is the Trans-Pacific. Second market is the west coast of South America with respect to perishable fruits and vegetables. That's really our strong point. About 3 to 4% of all the products that we move in and out emanate from Europe. More natural trade lane is across the Atlantic to the East Coast and Gulf Coast ports of the U.S.
So when the West Coast ports were having some challenges with productivity, I remember you coming in here saying some shippers were even going to take the extra cost and maybe go through the Panama Canal and go to the eastern ports like, Savannah or New York or whatever, New Orleans. Have you got that business back? Because we were just mentioning off air, I just saw a photo of a gazillion ships trying to get in and out of the Panama Canal because it's low water level. So that's not an option anymore, is it really?
Now, issues are popping up left and right, and now we're just a little more attuned to them in the supply chain with so many eyes on the system. We completed a 13-month contract negotiation with our dock workers back in the summertime. Since that contract was ratified, we've seen about 4.5 to 5 points of market share come back to the west coast of the U.S. There is good evidence from importers that they're moving a little bit more cargo via the west coast because the transit uncertainty going through the canal with its low water levels right now is a little bit too much of a risk. Even though you can buy yourself up in the queue a little bit, that doesn't apply to everybody going through there. And coming up, election year, a lot of folks will be looking at that policy and perspective. And the dock workers on the East and Gulf Coast will be negotiating their contract coming up this summertime. So a lot to keep in view.
Right, especially when it comes to those contract negotiations. Do you see any sort of sticking points that could cause any sort of concerns and potentially what that could affect when it comes to, obviously, the port and what that means for shipping?
Well, across America, we saw a summer of discontent, Jess, and a lot of final negotiations and contracting in the favor of labor and the employee. I don't see that any different on the East Coast. It's folks that work through the pandemic day and night, fearless of health and safety issues, trying to keep the American economy moving, and their payday is due.